Michelle, I know you say there's no silver bullet, but where do you start getting this, what Skip Gates referred to a while ago as a civil rights movement for education? Or have we passed the point where we do that anymore?
So I may contradict myself a little bit here, which is I did say that there is no silver bullet, and I think it's important to acknowledge that. But at the same time, I also think that we have to have a real sense of urgency around trying to fix the system. I don't think that it's okay to say, you know what, it's going to take 30 or 40 years, so everybody just be patient and sit still, because the children who are in our schools today who are not learning how to read are going to be at a significant disadvantage unless we have a much, much greater sense of urgency around what we're doing. I'm gonna read a quote. This is actually one of my favorite quotes. It says, "There is a tendency to rationalize poor performance by implying that poverty equals destiny, and so no one is to blame for failure. The challenge to public education today is not to reinforce the correlation between achievement and social class, but to sever it." That's actually a quote from Dr. Ravitch that in an op-ed that she wrote in the Washington Post. The reason why I love this quote so much is because it's not sort of saying, okay, it to me is incredibly aspirational. So we understand that environmental factors, cultural factors, et cetera, play a role in where we are today and put kids at a disadvantage. But shouldn't we aspire to do everything that we possibly can within the schools to put kids in a wildly different place? And that's why I think this thing about sort of the blame game is weird to me, because if we're saying, you know, for a teacher, for example, who is not showing that they can move student achievement levels forward, and if we make the decision based on that data to remove that teacher from the classroom, to me that's not a blame game. To me, it's saying that we know from the data that if a child, a poor child of color, who's growing up in the inner city, has 4 teachers in a row who are in the top quartile of performance, that it can literally close the achievement gap, then why shouldn't we be doing everything that we possibly can to make sure that every single child can have one of those teachers? Now, that's not, I'm saying in trying to do that, that's not necessarily blaming anybody for the problems. It's just changing the mindset to be aspirational. Why shouldn't we be doing everything that we possibly can do within the confines of the school, knowing that there's lots of other things that we can be doing and we should be doing, but within the confines of the school, what do we control and what do we know? What we know is that within in-school factors, the one thing that has the most impact on student achievement levels is the quality of teacher in front of the child every day.
Diane, thank you. Diane and then Angel.
Yes. There's been several economists who have said 3 great teachers in a row, 4 great teachers in a row, 5 great teachers in a row. The problem is that the way they rank teachers changes all the time, so that one year somebody who's in the top quartile, the next year might be in the second quartile, and it's very hard to know in advance who those great teachers are. So you probably need 5 years of data, at which point you'll have a very small number of teachers, and no one has figured out how to staff an entire school or an entire district with absolutely top quartile teachers. It's a wonderful aspiration. Unfortunately, it has never happened. It's a rough calculation by economists. We must, and I appreciate Michelle for quoting something I wrote many years ago, which I still believe in. I think we must aspire for excellence for every child. We must insist on equity, and that should be our goal. But we also must stop this trashing of teachers. I have been on a lecture tour I have been speaking this last year, and I've talked to many, many teachers. The profound demoralization among teachers in America today is almost hard to convey. Teachers feel that they are now being held solely accountable for everything, for social conditions beyond their control. And of course they should be held accountable for teaching kids to read, and of course principals should be very tough on them, but we should have principals who are master teachers who can help them, who can make sure they have the developmental knowledge that Dr. Comer talks about. And we have to have an ethos in education of encouragement, support, promotion of what we know to be right for children, and at the same time, encourage and respect teachers and stop beating up on them.
Angel?
So I wanted to clarify something. When I said that the gap is the projection suggests that it's going to take 6 decades in reading to close and 10 decades in math, I certainly think that we have to have a sense of urgency, right? But urgency is different from impulse. We can't be impulsive, right? We have to be pretty intelligent about this. And it doesn't mean a teacher's not effective, let's get rid of her. Perhaps we can retrain. The teaching profession is something that has to be elevated to a higher status to make more people want to do it. I mean, if we're frank with ourselves, we know that in general, schools of ed do not get the best students because it's not a high-paying job. The best students are going to go to sociology, doesn't get the best students. They're going to go to physics, they're going to go to engineering, they're going to go to biology, chemistry. And so that's, we have to elevate the prestige of the teaching profession. And we have to have a sense of urgency. Look, by 2040, 50% of the population is going to be black and brown. You can't have half of your population walking around with 8th grade skill sets, and that doesn't affect everyone. It's going to affect everyone. So we have to have urgency, but we can't be impulsive, because impulse leads us to spend millions of dollars spinning our wheels, trying to come up with this policy, and at the end of the day, you're just tweaking the same model. And we have to have a model that says, you know what, doesn't matter whether your parent can read or whether your parent's a professor at Yale or Harvard. That shouldn't matter. The model accounts for a different lens of the world. So it doesn't really matter what your background is.
I want to ask you a quick question before, I know Jim is eager to get into this, but my brother-in-law once was going on and on about they do this and they that, and I said, well, who are you talking about, they? And he said, well, if you have to ask me that, it means they've already gotten to you. I say that because you continue to say we. Who are we talking about here? Who is we?
We is, I'm projecting my sense of urgency and my respect for the depth of the problem to everyone else. And so I say we because I think we have to be altruistic. At the end of the day, we feel like, look, we have to ask ourselves, there's a gap. Some people actually benefit from this gap, right? I want my kid to go to Harvard and Yale. So if I can eliminate some people from the pool of contention, then that's a good thing, right? We have to be altruistic because I have a 3-year-old, and I understand that, look, the gap is going to be here for as long as she's in school. And you know what? I understand that, and I'm willing to say it's fine if we can get a real solution that can close it in 20 years, in 30 years. Because when she's an adult, I don't want half the population walking around with 8th grade skill sets. What I don't want is I don't want to feel like we have to solve this in the next 2 years. You're going to walk in guns blazing, pa, 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 and that's not going to, it's not going to solve anything. It hasn't.
Thanks, Jim.
I was going to make one point, but you've motivated me to make 2. Okay. When you say, who is we? There is a very specific group of people who make decisions about education in this country, and they're mostly at the state level. And that group of people will need to know much more about how children learn, and they will have to be, pressure has to be put on so that they will act in a way that is responsive to what we know about how children learn. You've got the policymakers in the legislature, you've got the policymakers at the state departments of education, you've got the policymakers and decision makers in schools of education, and that group of people make the decisions that they are the we. And that's the group we've got to put some pressure on to pay attention to create the need to create the model that he keeps talking about, the model change. That's one response. The second is... Before you get to the second one, you want to respond to that? No. Okay, go ahead. The second is, we've talked about teachers, but you know, teachers don't work alone. They shouldn't work alone. They are in buildings that should be cultures, and they should be learning together in those buildings and learn from each other and learn from parents and learn from kids themselves. And that is what we are missing, and that's the model that needs to be created.
Michelle?
I absolutely agree with that. I also agree wholeheartedly with what Dr. Ravitch was saying as well. I mean, she said, yes, we should have accountability, and yes, people should be held accountable for whether kids are learning how to read, but we have to create the right kind of environment. That's 100%. I mean, people in D.C. used to say to me every day when I was walking up and down the streets, oh my gosh, you have the hardest job in the city. And I would always say, no, I don't. The hardest job in this city is being an effective teacher in one of our schools. There is no harder job every day than going into a classroom and knowing that 24 or 26 or 30 kids are counting on you. And we have to figure out a way that we can recognize and reward our most highly effective teachers. I mean, it is, the fact remains that they are such an important part every day of the learning experience that our children have, and they have to be in an environment where they feel respected, and where we are doing everything that we can to create a culture where they feel valued.
Thank you.
So what I was going to say is, something occurred to me. So I was thinking, we need to have more fruitful discussions about the achievement gap and how to solve it. And so one of the things I do in my work as a quantitative researcher is I'll pose questions and look at the answer, and I'll give the answer, and the answer won't rely on my gut, my opinion. It's just what the numbers tell me. 2 + 2 is 4. So here's one thing that might be fruitful from this. So the parental involvement thing that I was telling you about. So this is a book that's due to Harvard Press next month, and it might not make it, but. One of the findings in this book was I looked at, using national data, I looked at how parents respond to poor performance. Now, there was a question that asked parents, how do you respond to poor performance if your child performs lower than expected? Okay. And there were a series of measures of parental involvement. Talk to the child, talk to the teacher, punish the child. I lumped them into 2 categories, punitive and non-punitive. Then I said, okay, this is based on national data. I compared black and white parents in terms of which one they engage in more. We all know the findings. Black parents are more likely to engage in punitive responses to poor performance, and white parents to non-punitive. When I linked that to achievement, I found that punitive responses lead to declines in achievement for black and white kids. Non-punitive lead to increases in achievement. So what's essentially, if you put those 2 findings together, you say, wow, blacks are doing more of what hurts and less of what helps. So when I hear people say, get the parents involved, bring them in, I say, wait a minute. We have to be careful, you have to be careful what you ask for. We assume that parental involvement is good, and I say, wait. We have to first know what the information is. It may be good in theory, it makes us feel good, it's a feel-good parental involvement is involved, but empirically, they have to know how to be involved, and you have to make sure that, maybe have a session on how to respond to poor performance. Punitive parenting is not the way. We should be having these kinds of discussions, asking and answering questions around things like this that perhaps you say, well, we have to make more informed decisions as opposed to just making decisions.
Do you know what the data looks like for Asian parents? I'm just curious.
What I found is
they're pretty punitive too.
I compared in this book, I compared black, white, Mexican Americans, non-Mexican, and Asian Americans. And Asian Americans, I break them into 2 categories, sort of your model minority Asians, your Chinese, Korean, and then your Southeast Asians, your more disadvantaged Asians. And what I find is that there are no differences, very little differences on these measures of parental involvement when their parental involvement at home, reading to the child, talking to the child. I find very little differences across race. Now, if a black and white parent both say they read to the child, it could be very different. I'm reading to you like this versus reading to you like this, right? It's 2 different ways of reading to the child, right? So it's not the same thing. But nevertheless, there's no difference in reporting in terms of parental involvement differences. When I look at the link between parental involvement and achievement, I do find big differences. Most of the forms of parental involvement, many of them lead to increases for whites, not for Latinos, not for blacks, and not for Asian Americans. When I present this, Asian Americans usually say, they come up to me at the end and say, that doesn't surprise us because that's not what we count as parental involvement. So there you have it.
Diane and then Jim, and then we're going to have Professor Bobo sum up briefly so that we can engage the audience, because I would imagine that many of you have questions, and we have mics on either side of this, over there and here. So start to think about your questions, or if you just want to make an intervention. Those of you who've been to this panel session before know that I ask you to be pithy and brief. Jim? Oh, no, it was Diane.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Okay. We've been talking, a thread in the conversation this evening is about having a new way of looking at how we educate children. And what I've discovered looking over the 20th century and now in this part of our new century is that we are wedded, and I'm speaking now of the power centers that Dr. Comer didn't mention, meaning Congress and the U.S. Department of Education, and the governors are wedded to this idea that the way to improve education is by threatening people, by punishing people, by offering them rewards if they get higher test scores. This is called test-based accountability, and there was just a major report, and right before Memorial Day came from the National Research Council, the most prestigious research group in the country, that said test-based accountability doesn't work. It leads to narrowing of the curriculum so that schools drop the arts and history and civics and foreign languages. It leads to cheating. It leads to gaming the system. That what people need in their lives is instead of threatening them and promising them merit pay, which has never worked. Merit pay has been tried since the 1920s. It has never, ever had a positive impact, and it has been evaluated time and again. It makes no difference whatever, whether people are offered a bonus or not. Threatening them doesn't make them better either. It just leads them to do bad things like cheat. What people need in order to be professional, and what I think children need in order to be strong in school, is first of all, appeal to a sense of purpose, especially among professionals, autonomy. I would urge you all to read the work of Dan Ariely of MIT in North Carolina, Daniel Pink, his wonderful book Drive, about what motivates people. People are motivated mainly by sense of purpose, particularly if they become teachers. They don't become teachers because they expect to make a lot of money. They become teachers because they want to make a difference in the lives of children. And with children, instead of using punishments and rewards, we should look to the principles that Dr. Comer talks about. Each child is a precious human being. And forgive me for saying this, but I'm borrowing from my Catholic friend. Each child is a precious human being in the sight of God. No one gets thrown away. Everyone gets help.
Professor Bobo, could we have a brief, pithy but brief, were you next? Okay, you were looking at me like you wanted to say something.
No, I just want to agree, but also Angel keeps making the point about the importance of the quantitative evidence, and I agree with that. But I also want to talk about the qualitative and remind us that observations in class, in schools, with parents, with everybody trying to examine the issue is an important way, and an important way we need to practice education in the same way that we practice medicine. You know, and we need to do it. You know, in 1910, when medicine reformed itself, it looked at what are the disciplines, and what's the knowledge base that we need? And the knowledge base was anatomy and physiology. There's a knowledge base in education that we need also. It has to do with the academics, and it also has to do with the promotion of child development. And focusing that on the preparation of children for the future, and then learning how to do that in every gathering inside and outside of the school that we have about education.